To order. Welcome to our regular school board meeting on Monday, February 26th. And we'll start with roll call.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Mark Hillman.
Here.
Angie Skillings. Here. Carl Palmer.
Here.
Abe Smith.
Here.
Dominique Stewart.
Here.
Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Dale Duffy.
Here.
Amber Kirsty.
Here. We have a quorum. Let's stand for the pledge of allegiance.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our mission statement: the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique means and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. I also wanted to note that February 26th through March 1st is Public Schools Week in Wisconsin, an opportunity we have every year to celebrate all the great things that happen in our schools and the role that schools play in our lives. I wanted to read a sentence from the governor's proclamation this year. Public schools are at the heart of every community, laying the foundation for good citizenship, inspiring future leaders, and creating safe, welcoming, and supportive spaces for kids and families from all backgrounds. So I wanted to take a minute to honor the work that public educators do across the state and right here in Menomonie, including but not limited to the folks in the room tonight. So thank you all. Do we have any proposed changes to the agenda order tonight? Seeing none, we'll move into community communications. It looks like we have 3 speakers tonight. First is Ruth Renison.
I'll be reading this book, It Feels Good to Be Yourself. See, when you were born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt. They looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. What a baby's body looks like when they're born can be a clue to what the baby's gender will be, but not always. When people guess wrong, it's okay to let them know. Ruthie was 5 when she told her parents, I know you think I'm a boy, but really I feel like a girl. Oops, Ruthie was a girl all along. They just didn't know it at first. When people guess right, it's okay to let them know. Xavier was 3 1/2 when he told his family, I'm a boy, I like being a boy. You might feel like a boy, you might feel like a girl. You might feel like both boy and girl, or like neither. You might feel like your gender changes from day to day or from year to year. You might feel that none of these words describes you perfectly. You might not be sure yet. Maybe you're still figuring it out. Your feelings about your gender are real. Listen to your heart. No matter what your gender identity is, you are okay exactly the way you are, and you are loved. It feels good to be yourself, doesn't it?
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Josie Philman.
Hi, Dr. Zadowski and members of the board. I'm Josie Philman and I live in NAP, the Menomonie School District. Just to preface, that book that Ruth read is still in the NAP Elementary School Library. This is a book, Just Ducky. On a small farm with a family of ducks, one little duckling was confused. He thought he was a rooster. His name was Little Ducky. Every morning he saw Rooster Riley with his beautiful red comb on his head, sitting on top of the barn letting out a loud crow. Little Ducky thought if only he had a red comb, everyone would see he was a rooster too. One day he found the farmer's red work glove and put it on his head. See, I'm a rooster, just like Rooster Riley. But the other barnyard animals just laughed at him. You're not a rooster, they said. That glove looks silly on your head. Little Ducky was sad. He was so sure he was a rooster. He always woke up early, just like a rooster at the crack of dawn. He even started practicing how to crow. However, when he let out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo, it sounded more like quack-a-doodle-doo. Rooster Riley just laughed. That isn't how roosters crow, he said to Little Ducky. You sound like a duck. One day, wise little duck who lived in the same farmyard waddled over to little ducky and took him under her wing. Listen, little ducky, she said, don't pay any attention to those other animals. Let me help you understand who you are. Look at your feet. You have webbed feet. Your feet are not like a rooster's feet. Yes, but I don't feel like a duck. I feel like a rooster, replied little ducky. Remember, who you are isn't based on your feelings, explained wise old duck. Feelings change. What doesn't change is the way you were made. Now look at your bill, she continued. You have a nice bill, not a beak like a rooster. That wonderful bill was made so you could catch small fish and insects. Does a rooster have a bill like that? No, said little ducky. The rooster pecks at seeds on the ground. That's how he was made. Ducks were made to do things that roosters cannot do. You can dive down under the water and eat little fish and underwater plants. Little ducky looked at the other ducklings in the pond. He realized that wise old duck was right. Being a rooster wasn't all it was quacked up to be. You mean I was made just the way I am for a reason? Yes. No mistakes, quacked wise old duck. Let's go swimming. But I'm afraid to swim. Just try it and pretty soon you'll feel more and more at home in the water. But what if I still think I'm a rooster? Isn't it important to be who you think you are? No, our thoughts often lead us astray. There's an old saying, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. You are a duck. Little duck said to himself, I was made to be a duck, not a rooster. Suddenly he jumped in. Look, everyone, I'm swimming. Rooster Roddy strutted on over. Now that's something to crow about. Little ducky suddenly felt a new confidence. Excuse me, I can swim. Yes, everything was fine. Be content with the way you are made. Before long, the confused feelings will fall into line like ducks in a row. So I'm pointedly telling the school board, this is full of lies, it's for small children, this is full of truth. This book, you know, I've tried to get it out of the library. No, it stays. I've tried to get this one in. It's not there. And I think as a school board, you should consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Rebecca Hoffman. Is that right?
Yes. Hello. I'm a new member of Menomonie, Wisconsin. I'm also a homeschool mom. I homeschooled my mother for 9 years. I worked in the St. Francis School District in Minnesota. I also worked at St. Francis Christian School. I'm a Christian, and I agree with my sisters, and I want to just kind of clear up the confusion of humanity. We are humanity. We were made in the image of God, and I'm going to read from the Bible, from Genesis. Forgive my nerves. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And so God created man, sorry about my nerves, in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. There is no confusion. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. And, sorry, moving on, we'll have the personnel consent agenda. Entertain a motion to, there is nothing on the personnel consent agenda, just kidding. So we'll move on to the action agenda, starting with the MHS course recommendations for 2024-2025. I'll entertain a motion.
I so move we approve as presented the course request to run under 15 students.
I'd second that.
Motion by Carl, second by Amber. Any discussion? This is something we saw last month. Are there any changes to it since then?
Yes, Mr. Seglin's not able to be here tonight, but he wanted to point out that the change from the initial list had to do with a recommendation from the high school to run advanced theater in the place of the original recommended contemporary voice and theater course. The recommended change is being made following additional discussion with the staff within the department, and that's what they think is to best serve our students for next year.
Is that the same number of students that was in the recommended voice class? Do you remember?
I think it was close. I don't know if it was the exact same, but I think they're also anticipating where the students may end up.
Oh. Does anyone have questions or discussion about that change or anything else on here? All right. Seeing none, we can vote. And the motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the approval of a couple of staffing plan changes for this school year. Can we get a motion regarding that?
I make a motion to add those, looks like, parameters.
I'll second.
Sure, just to give the board an update, so we have.
Excuse me for just a minute.
Sure.
Hi. This is my daughter, and I would prefer. Okay? Okay.
So the staffing additions that are being recommended tonight have to do with two students' situations with some very high needs. We have students that come into our district throughout the school year, and in cases where a student needs individual attention, additional adult support is needed. So as the board members can see, we have a situation with one student who is a part-time student who needs to be accompanied by an adult at all times. And then we have another student who has high medical needs, so needs an adult as well. So the recommendation is that the board approve these tonight.
Any questions or discussion about those recommendations?
I guess one comment is, based on what we heard at QIC last couple of times, these do seem like necessary additions. They're not at all superfluous. There's a clear need in those situations.
And this is a good example, Abe, of why the district typically carries a contingency fund. You know, we do our staffing plan, but as the board has seen over the last several months, as the school year started in September and then carried forward, we try to plan for as much as we can, but there's situations like this that come up each and every year. So I think that's why we do plan ahead, and that's why we're making this recommendation.
Great, thanks for that added context. And I agree that I think we've heard a lot from teachers at both those schools about the need that's currently there. If there's no other questions or comments, you can vote.
First, I'm sorry. Did you call?
Amy.
Amy and Dale. That motion passes unanimously. So the last item on our action agenda is a consideration of bids for the MHS pool repair. And before anyone jumps in with a motion, I just want to clarify that we've been, board members have in our docs, a bunch of information and some proposed options. So I think we'd be looking for a motion for an option before we start discussion, I guess.
Would you like me to summarize the project first?
Sure.
We can, it's up to you, it's the will of the board,
Okay,
before you figure out what kind of motion you want to make.
sounds good, that makes sense.
Okay, so first of all, this project has been in the works for well over a year. Kevin Tomaszewski, Kevin, why don't you come up to a chair next to Katie in case there are questions. Kevin has been keeping the board up to speed on this during his regular updates to the board. This project also was included either a year or two ago. It was included in the capital improvement plan. We became aware of some structural issues in the pool, and they're not safety issues to the point where we're worried about, collapse of a wall or anything like that. Nothing to that significant, because we would shut the pool down if that was the case. But there are concerns with one of the walls shifting. There's a HVAC tunnel that's involved, and it has caused significant cracking and really kind of destroying the tile deck on one part of the pool. Now that does become a safety concern when you're talking about barefooted people in the pool, And it's a concern that will probably continue to get worse if it is not addressed. The pool also is aging. We're very concerned about the filtration system and our ability to keep that up and running. Kevin shared a number of pictures with the board, and I know we've talked about that before as well. There's been so much repair done to that system that it really is at the end of its life, its useful life. And people count on us. I can't emphasize enough how many people count on us for to have that pool, whether it be for lap swimming, swimming lessons, the teams that compete in it, the clubs that swim in it, and with Stout closing their pool, especially during the winter, it's really the only option that we have in town. So Kevin and his team did a great job putting together a bid package, tried to identify and prioritize improvements in the pool. Unfortunately, the bids came back significantly higher than what was originally budgeted for this project. And Kevin can go through any of the details that you want to discuss, but what we've done is we've tried to prioritize the project. Certainly the board does have funding in the capital improvement fund, but we also know that that fund is not limitless. We know that, we go out a certain number of years and there's not going to be enough funding to continue with the capital improvement needs. In looking at this project, really the priorities have to do with the filtering system and then also reinforcing the structural issues that I mentioned earlier. The tiling is something that needs to be done, but the way the bids came back in, we feel that the tiling could be postponed. That is something that could be looked at as a separate project down the line. I am concerned about the bleachers in the pool. They've been in there for decades, and when I watch people try to climb up and down those bleachers with no aisles and also big gaps between the seats and the rails, they are grandfathered in, but they do not meet current ADA requirements, especially when they get a little bit wet. We're very concerned with people climbing up and down those bleachers. But I think the priority has to be on the filtration. I think the priority has to be on the structure. I do think no matter what, the tiling could be put off and rebid at a different time. But then I think the rest of it really is up to the board in terms of what you want to do for this project. Kevin, did I miss anything that you wanted to mention?
I would just add that if we're going to postpone the tile work, that we also postpone the bleachers so we don't have to move them, a year from now should we proceed.
If we postpone the tile work, are there like intermediary fixes that could make that less of a safety concern?
Yeah, I think what we've done in the past is put carpet runners down in that area.
Oh, sure, okay.
And we can continue to do that.
Yeah, it certainly isn't ideal, and I do worry about the levelness of the area as it has gotten worse. But I do think in terms of potential cut feet and stuff like that, I think a short-term solution could be used to mitigate the concern.
Could I ask about the UV filter part? Obviously, the filter is the heart of the whole operation, and are we talking about potentially cutting out the UV to save short-term dollars, but will that cost us more in chemicals and things in operations over the life of the pool, or?
No, it's not expected to, and we would make provisions to make it quick, where we can install it in the future, quickly. Put up valves there, we can shut everything off, and filter in, and right back to business.
So it's modular in nature.
Yes.
And
Yep.
And what Carl's referring to is some of the value engineering that we are recommending would be to deduct the UV filter. The other filtering system and the type of filtering system that we've had for all these years is quite effective. We think the UV filter would be nice, but it's not 100% necessary. The painting of the pool walls is something that we could try to fit into our seasonal project list. It's a big project, and it might not be able to be done all at once, but I think when we look at the cost of this bid, I think that makes sense. And then like we talked about with the bleachers, postponing them to a later time is something that I think we could live with, although it is a concern.
Can I just ask, is the tile the original tile from when the pool was installed?
As far as I know, yes.
And you know when that was?
I think it was about,
70s.
yeah, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm not sure. Mark, you were here, weren't you? Or Dale, maybe you.
I remember.
It was 71, something like that. Oh, it's no, 81, excuse me. 80,
81 sounds right to me.
please.
I went from not being here to being here.
Kevin, is that reinforcement of that tunnel, is that separate from the tiling?
Yes.
So would that be a higher priority then? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, yeah, we absolutely think that the board should approve, and we're recommending the board approve reinforcing the structural issues and replacing the filter.
Okay, I was just a little unsure about that. Inside here, but can those bleachers be used elsewhere, or are they just not to be used elsewhere? I was thinking outside sports complex area or...
Yeah, I think they could be used, like I said, the grandfathered in. I think where they're used would be important. Having them in the pool I don't think is ideal. One, because they're aluminum bleachers and again, no aisles. So when I see parents, grandparents, young kids, whatever, climbing up those bleachers, especially when the first couple rows get wet, I get really concerned of people more coming down than going up. But yeah, I think especially if they're on grass or some sort of natural surface instead of on tile, I would feel a little better about it.
Yeah, I could see some real good reuse for them outside. Under special situations especially, you know, especially events or whatever. Okay.
I have one question about the time frame of the repairs, the minimum repairs that you were recommending. How long will the pool be shut down, and when would that be?
I believe now we'd be looking at early May, and it would be ideally complete by summer school.
Okay.
Scheduled to be completed by summer school.
So if you did the entire project, is that a lengthier shutdown?
We think we can still do it, everything.
Okay.
Kevin, you said early May. That's when it's scheduled to be shut down?
Where we are now, pushing it to early May.
Okay, I see. And that's a whole other issue with this project, is trying to time it to the point where work can be done in there without disrupting. It's going to be disruptive no matter what, but trying to minimize the disruptions is what we've tried to do with the schedule that's been developed.
Is it possible to take swimming lessons out of the first session of summer school, or is that kind of a non-starter to give more wiggle room in case of overtime?
Well, I think we have to, I mean,
Well, I guess I mean thinking that the summer school registration will happen long before we know how the project's going, right? And if the parents are expecting their kids to go to swimming lessons the first week in July,
Right.
or in June, excuse me.
we can talk with Stacy about that, but I think the best thing we can do is hit our deadline.
Sure. But there's so much that would be outside of our control, I guess, or your control.
What was the biggest item that went past what we thought for budgeting? Was it the tiling, labor, or?
Well, the tile as a whole, I don't have a breakdown of the materials versus labor. The second part of it, the filter was a little high. We got our budgeting numbers from company A. Company B bid it, company A pulled out.
So if we don't do the tiling, we do gain some flexibility in going out to other quotes for people that's just what they do and maybe have better pricing and flexibility.
Okay.
Where I'm going with it is I think eventually we have to fix the tile. But if it's coming in a couple $100,000 over what we thought it was gonna cost, maybe we can wait and get it cheaper.
The other thing too is Kevin and I have talked about alternate solutions. I mean, really the entire pool deck should be retiled. At the same time, with the budget constraints we're looking at right now, perhaps a smaller scale project for the tiling might be something to consider. I'm hesitant to commit to that, but you know, if we're talking about one end of the pool that is the worst, perhaps that could be prioritized if the budget cannot sustain a more substantial project.
Maybe for the sake of being following, or let me propose that we advance with what you call, well, maybe first go through the 4 options specifically, and then I was going to propose option 4. But
Okay. So the first,
Before we jump into that, can we make sure there's no more questions for Kevin, I guess, or Joe on the subject?
I'm curious, you had mentioned Stout closed their pool. When did that happen?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. So as far from like a revenue standpoint, has there been a tremendous uptick in people coming to the pool versus years prior? And, you know, from a revenue standpoint, will we be able to generate, you know, more monies to potentially pay in the future for this?
I wouldn't call it a tremendous uptick. I think that's what you called it, Mark. But yes.
That was more of a question.
Yes, we have had Stout, we have had time slots designated for Stout. And I do think, you know, when we talk about our budget upcoming, I think increasing fees across the board is something that the board is going to have to look at and potentially consider. A tremendous amount though, I don't think it's going to be tremendous, but yeah, I do think there's some revenue to be gained there.
In terms of that question though about public use, I mean, since Stout closed their pool, it was several years ago now. The high school pool is one of the only places in the county that someone can go to learn to swim with in our summer school program having the swim lessons throughout the summer. I mean, we live in an area with lakes and rivers where people drown every year, and teaching kids to swim is absolutely critical for safety and for recreation, of course, too. So just to emphasize, it's not just like this is a true community resource in the truest sense.
And it is. I had a mom at the field house just last week mentioned to me how the district really needs to consider adding additional swimming lessons. I think the last round that opened up filled within 5 minutes. So even people who are sitting waiting for the enrollment didn't actually get in. So I know we also have private swim lessons that are being offered in our pool. We had a number of students take lifeguard safety and are learning how to give lessons. My daughter is one of them. She's going through a training program. She's a freshman right now. I know that's a point of emphasis for Mrs. Guy Holloway, our new activities director. So we are trying to ramp up, but we have to have the facility available as well. But to Abe's, do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
To Abe's point, so what we shared for the board really are 4 options. One is to approve the budget for the completion of the entire project as scheduled. It would go over what was preliminarily approved in the 30-year plan. The second option would be approve the budget for the completion of the project with the deductions as scheduled. And the deductions that we mentioned were the UV filter, painting of the walls, and the new bleachers. And then the fourth one is postpone a portion of the project. I'm sorry, the third one was postpone the entire project until 2025. The fourth one was postpone a portion of the project with immediate focus on replacing the filtering system to avoid the pool being shut down if the old pump fails, and the added expenses for repairing the old pump until the project is completed.
So with that kind of preface, I guess, so I guess I'd put for a motion to approve option 4, and I'm open to other options as well, but I think we need something on the floor to actually discuss details of.
And just to clarify, option 4 doesn't mention the tunnel wall, but the tunnel, am I saying that right, the tunnel wall?
The tunnel, the structural support.
The structural support, but that is intended to be included in option 4, right?
Yes, option 4 is everything except for the UV filter, painting the walls, and the new bleachers. Is that correct, Kevin?
I don't have that list in front of me.
No, because it also doesn't include the tile, right?
It also delays the tile, as stated, I believe.
So option 4 is postponing a portion of the project with immediate focus on replacing the filtering system and avoid the pool being shut down. but it doesn't mention the tunnel, but the intention is.
Oh,
that-
I'm sorry, Rachel, you're correct. It's in the lower update.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you are correct. So,
Perhaps I should read it for the motion.
yeah, please do it.
So,
I apologize.
so what I intended to have the motion be on is to proceed with the highly recommended repairs being the filter and the structural repair of the tunnel. Postponing the tile, the specific tile repair, and deleting the recommended deductions at the top, which is the optional UV filter, using in-house labor to do the painting, and postponing any change to the bleachers until the tile is done. That was the intent. That was meant to be a motion.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll set,
that.
no,
Okay. Motion by Abe, second by Amber.
Is there any way you could email that to me?
Yes.
I didn't get that.
Any discussion on that motion?
I just think it makes a lot of sense and it keeps us to what we said we budget for that project right now. That's
Yeah.
my thought.
How did we come up with a budget? Can I ask why there's such a huge discrepancy? I mean, is it a problem where we didn't have a realistic budget?
Well,
Inflation?
we reached out to a local engineering firm to put together all the pieces of this project. And that is the number that I took, their suggestion of what they thought the project would cost.
Yeah.
And again, the tile came in approximately double of what we estimated. We used, I think, $30 a square foot because they're our budgeting numbers, and they came in closer to 70. And then the filter was a little higher due to lack of pool bidders on the project, which also drove that cost up.
Okay.
How long ago was that? I think we started this near 2 years ago.
I don't personally think it's gonna get cheaper, but we did a building on adding 200,000 square feet of warehouse space, and I think maybe 5 years ago, we built a warehouse, and the project came in triple what we spent 5 years ago, so, same thing.
That's my concern. Our material is going to get more expensive, and then we're going to have to postpone again, or come up with another plan, or whatever, if we don't fund the whole thing. But at the same time, I agree with number 4, because I don't think we can afford to do the whole project at this point.
I do think Carl's point earlier was well taken, that if part of, what we're pulling out specifically is the tiling, it seems like we may have additional options to get a bid on the tiling if it's not part of the whole structural project. Is that something that you would expect to be the case?
That's my train of thought, correct?
Okay.
On the in-house painting, yes, that's okay. Great. On the in-house painting, I guess this is kind of a rudimentary question, but, given the high humidity of the environment and, the size of the space, can that be done while, pool activities are ongoing? Or is it still going to be a shutdown to paint, or doing it simultaneously with the other repairs?
No, we haven't discussed any issues with putting paint up. That was a discussion I had with the engineering firm, and they said absolutely, you guys can do it.
It's also worth noting, the project may not get cheaper, probably, or could potentially come in more expensive, but we could also have a better sense of our budget in a few months' time, where we might feel more comfortable making that decision.
I just can't see it doubling if we wait a year even for the process of looking at tile. It might go up, it might not, but I don't think it'll go up as fast as it went up already. I don't know.
I feel like keeping it open and running is the priority, and there are, in some ways it crushes me not to say let's do it all, because I think it's a very important space, but I also know there'll be other things coming up. Who knows what structurally, other systems, that need maintenance. Other bids are going to come in high for other projects in the future. So I think that being a little bit wise with, doing the things that are structurally necessary now, and things that are, let's say, just on the near side of being a safety hazard, the bleachers and the tile, we can work with as has been done, and plan it out a little more carefully for those steps.
Any other discussion on the motion as presented?
Rachel, not to muddy the water here, but I just want to make sure we have a clear understanding because we did list out those items. One thing that has not been discussed are the diving boards as well, and those are included in the recommendation for replacement. And you've seen the pictures, they definitely need work. So I assume the motion to include that, but I just don't want to leave that out.
That was intended, yeah, I did not mean to neglect that. So that I would include the diving boards in the recommended safety repairs. So if you want to add that to the top one.
Does the seconder approve that inclusion?
Second.
Okay.
All seconds.
Second and second.
No one wants a scary diving board.
Just for clarity's sake, can someone for me just review what is underneath what we are saying yes to and what we're postponing?
So the things in the motion to postpone are delaying the tile work to a later date, and then applying the optional deductions of delete the UV filter option, do the painting in-house, and keep the bleachers in place until the tile work is done at a later date. So the tile work is the main item there, with UV filter, in-house painting, and bleachers as a secondary to that.
So basically the filter and the diving boards.
A little structural repair.
And structural repair.
I'm also looking at Kevin to see if that is what makes sense to you, because that's, is there an understanding for you of what the motion is so that you know how to proceed if it goes ahead?
Yes, that makes sense to me, and it covers everything in the list. Another item that we're going to do is the caulking between the precast panels. I don't recommend taking that out.
So now it includes the caulking as well for the motion, right?
I know, like, that you are being conservative, actually, and I'm not going to be right here. I mean, I can kind of agree with what Carl said about the tile, but I feel like if we're gonna do it, we're gonna shut down the pool, and we're gonna have, like, we should do maybe everything but the tile and get up, because $19,000 for painting isn't, in the whole scheme of the project, a big savings. So why not have somebody who is a painter and is going to do it right? Like, you get what you pay for sometimes. And if we're gonna have a bunch of staff people who don't really know how to paint, go in there and try to paint the pool, I feel like we're gonna be in the same position we were in before we started. So in my mind, I think we should include everything but the cosmetic. And the new bleachers are $50,000, $56,000. In the whole scheme of the project, that's really not that much either when you're looking at a $1.3 million project. So in my mind, if we can eliminate the $350,000 for the tile and do everything else, we are that much closer to our original budget, I guess, but have all of those little things out of the way, I don't know. That's just my non-conservative thought.
If I can comment real quick on
Yes.
that. So as far as the paint goes, we're not doing a complete paint job in there. We're maybe 10 feet up, 12 colors change, we're going up to that line. So we're looking at approaching $20,000 just to go up that high on the entire room. So for that reason, I think that dollar amount's kind of high. As far as the bleachers, I am just concerned about getting the new bleachers installed, and then a year from now, if we come back to the 30-year plan, it gets approved to do the tile work, and we got to pull the bleachers out, but the tile down.
Are the bleachers that
Are the bleachers in there the same ones that are used in the field house, like during basketball games and things like that are just on wheels?
They're pretty similar, yes.
So,
The ones in the pool go up, I think, another 2 rows higher
Okay.
than the ones in the field house.
If nobody agrees with me, I won't go around with what you think, but I think, I mean,
My heart's with you.
yeah.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I do respect Kevin's opinion regarding, the bleachers and the tiling. Timing those projects together seems to make a lot of sense to me. And I also hope you don't feel like you and your staff are insulted. I agree in general, it's better to pay a professional, but also, it is helpful context that you're not talking about people on 20-foot ladders. You're talking really about the lower portion of that wall. There's a lot less safety.
We are self-insured, remember?
That's true.
Not for workers'
Not for
comp.
workers' comp, that's a whole different subject.
20-foot extension ladders on a wet pool that.
Dry that.
So, I'm gonna ask an impossible question, but, given the idea of postponing the tile and the bleachers, the budgetary question is totally up in the air. But, I mean, obviously there's a temptation to do it now because that was the original proposal, but what do you feel like is a reasonable timeline in which that, that really needs to be done in X years?
The tile work?
Yeah.
I think, like I mentioned, that 30-year plan update in January, I would bring it back then for your
So you
consideration.
consider it in a year-ish?
Yes.
Okay.
I would keep it close.
Yeah.
To Angie's point, that means there'll be another pool closure that you'll have to work in.
That's a really good point,
It might be
Dale.
easier to do it now.
That is a really good point, because when we talk about the tile, that's a big project. That's not gonna be done over spring break, I don't think.
I don't have a timeline for how much only the tile would take. More than a week.
I think that ideally it would be nice to have the pool only closed once. However, it seems a little financially risky to do, or not risky, but questionable to do a project quite over budget, like, kind of close after not passing a referendum that we were hoping to have to create stability. So I think given the recent events, it makes sense to do what we need to keep the pool functional at this time. But I think it makes the most sense and maybe it is a little wiser to postpone the tile situation.
All right, thanks everybody for that discussion, and thank you, Kevin, for answering all our detailed and impossible questions. Are we ready to vote? All right, let's vote. Motion passes unanimously. All right, so before we move on to the discussion items, I just want to remind everyone here, this is a public meeting. Everyone is welcome to be here, to be part of it. We appreciate the community participating. I want to ask that everyone be respectful of other folks in the audience tonight. Our first discussion item is a review of the clerk's report of the referendum election. Take it away, clerk.
Thank you. A referendum election was held in the district on February 20th on the question of whether the school district budget should exceed the revenue limit by 4.2 million. And then sorry, I need to read all this. Cool. Okay, so then we had a Board of Canvassers meeting last Friday. I don't have the date of that, sorry, but I was here. The 23rd, thank you. And we certified the votes. There were 1,891 yes votes and 2,768 no votes. The Board of Canvassers included myself, Carly Preuss, and Jenny Meixel.
Thank you. Just want to say, even though the referendum did not pass, the school board, along with our admin team, remain committed to our mission, our vision, and our strategic plan. And there's going to be difficult discussions ahead, but we want everyone in the community to know that what's best for our students is going to be at the center of every discussion. Anything else on that subject? Next up, we have a review of school district plans related to upcoming state tournaments.
So as the board members heard from our student representatives at the last meeting, it's been a very successful winter at Menomonie High School. In addition to the dance team participating at the state tournament and the Science Olympiad team winning their regional last weekend at Menomonie High School, the wrestling team will be going to state as a team for the first time in school history this coming weekend. We did have some individual wrestlers compete at the individual state tournament. Braden Casey was the runner-up in the 113-pound division. Over 100 career wins, just a terrific career for Braden Casey. But the team is going Friday, and Sam and the HR department provided all staff members with instructions for how to request time off. I think Stanley had about 15 staff members that are going to be going to Madison for the state tournament on Friday. About half of those will need a substitute or some sort of coverage, so we're working on that. We are planning on having school on Friday, March 1st. Certainly students who get permission from their parents to go will be excused. We offered a fan bus. There were not enough students signed up to take a fan bus, so people will be going down on their own, but that's Friday, March 1st. The girls basketball team won the regional championship last weekend at Menomonie High School. Dale, I know I saw you there on Saturday night. Just a terrific season for the girls. They have their sectional semifinal game Thursday at Marshfield, and then if they win that one, they'll play on Saturday, and I think that's in Wausau. And if they win that, then they'll go to the state tournament as well. The hockey team completed a great season. They played in the sectional final on Saturday over in Somerset. They did get beat 2-0 by River Falls, but a terrific season for the hockey team. They will not be going to state, so we're not going to need to worry about Thursday in terms of state tournament appearance. And then the boys basketball team, they start their tournament bracket this Tuesday, tomorrow, all the way over in Lakeland. Menomonie, I believe, is where that's at. So it's going to be a busy week for the boys basketball team. If they win on Tuesday, then they play on, I believe it's Friday and Saturday back to back. So you keep playing, you win or you go home, the way the tournament works. But congratulations to all of the athletes and participants in all the different activities this winter.
It's a lot of excitement. Any questions or commentary on all that? Thank you for the review. Next up, we have a review of the pupil non-discrimination and equality of education opportunities self-evaluation report.
So Tony Kowalski and her team spent months, at least months, putting this together. So Tony, go ahead and take it away.
All right, this is a self-evaluation report from DPI. We complete it about every 5 years. The last time we did it was 2017. It's a little more than 5 years ago, but we had that COVID thing going on, so it kind of interrupted. It has significantly changed since 2017, meaning it's like doubled or tripled in the size of the report. So when it first came out, I was a little shocked, as most districts around the area were a little shocked seeing how big this had really become. So I was hoping to have this to you earlier, but we took a little bit more time to kind of go through it. As you can see there, again, this is a self-evaluation. It really is for us to really look at some of our practices and kind of look at it and then reflect upon what we're kind of doing. There are areas that we look in, and those are required areas, but how we look at that, they do give you a rubric, but it is kind of a guide. It is not, you can kind of go off that guide, but you can add more things to it if you would like to. A variety of staff helped with this. We did reach out to the public to see, I did get one parent, a community member, contact me, ask me some questions about the report. I did share kind of a rough draft of the report with them, but after that, they really didn't have any further comments to make. But we did have one parent. I think in 2017, we did not have any parents, so. Kind of some highlights. I know it's kind of a lengthy report, so I kind of just want to go over a little highlights.
27 pages.
Yep. So for board policy, as I was looking at that, you will probably see a board policy come forth, really kind of looking at our grievance process and maybe pulling that out into a separate policy as recommended when I was kind of reviewing that. As far as I think across the board, I think our district and our kind of student services staff does a really great job at making sure messages get out to the total student population. But as always, I think we can always do better. And when we really look at some of taking different classes, students participating in different scholarships, that we really need to make a big effort to make sure we're going into classrooms that maybe have students that are underrepresented in our data. For example, are we going into our special ed classrooms and really kind of talking about scholarships, helping students with IEPs maybe navigate that process, having students going in and talking about the different opportunities to take classes, making sure that they know that they also can participate in those things. We've already started doing some of I know our high school had already started going into classes and talking about scholarships, and we did see a little increase in students with IEPs actually applying for scholarships and then being awarded scholarships, which is great to see. As far as our athletics, I really, when I looked at that data, let me see if I can get to that page, I'm very proud of our district and how much opportunities, which if it's not athletics, the extracurricular activities and clubs that we offer students, and then our participation rates. In the 2023 school year, 82% of middle school students and 74% of high school students participated in at least one athletic or club activity, which I think is great. I think those are high numbers. We do see a decrease when you get into high school, but I think sometimes they shift the academic rigor. Some students participate in, for example, now we have this, like our business academy. I think it's a very rigorous program that maybe kids are focusing academics and they have maybe some less time for some other things. But I think that participation rate is really great, and I think it shows that we have lots of opportunities for kids to find something that they can participate and enjoy doing. I think that's all kind of my highlights that I wanted to share. Questions, comments?
First of all, I love this report. I think it's really cool. And I took a lot of time looking through it, and I was also going to ask you, is this the one that you were talking about at the diversity committee?
Yes.
That needed to be done, and
Yes.
they gave you a little extra time?
Yeah, they did.
Was there something on this? I thought so, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yes. I think even when it first came out, it was originally due in December, but I think there was a little delay in getting that out to public schools, and so I think DPI responded by, let's give districts extra time so that they can actually kind of dive through the data. It's a lot of data to look at, to pull and kind of look at. We needed time to do that, so I was thankful that DPI kind of extended that for us. So.
Well, I thought it was pretty well done. Thank you.
Me too. I thought it was really well done and a tremendous report. You talked about the scholarships and getting the word out to everybody about those scholarships. This is kind of a tangent to that. Is there any help afforded to the students or parents for the FAFSA form, which is kind of something that sometimes stands in the way of financial aid if you don't get it properly filled out?
Yeah. I know, because I have a daughter in college and one about to go into college, and yes, I would agree that form is a little more complicated than maybe it needs to be. I know when my first daughter I had to fill that out, the school counselors kind of didn't necessarily sit down and help you, but let you know that it's out there and it needed to be filled out. I don't know, I don't think our high school counselors sit down with families to do that. I would be a little concerned because there's a lot of financial data that it asks for. But I know there's other outside resources. If you go online, they can help you kind of navigate and fill that out. It has changed though this year. I've heard it's maybe a little better. I have not done it yet.
So I guess, I wasn't aware of the online help, but that would be something to make sure everybody is fully aware of.
I think our school counselors at our high school do a really great job as students are transitioning. So they are meeting with they take a very concerted effort to make sure that they're meeting with every freshman and every junior by appointment for all the sophomore and seniors. And then as kids if you look on the daily announcements, I've gotten emails, because I have a senior now, about different things that we need to be doing as senior parents, basically.
One thing I was curious about in terms of, having a safe and inclusive environment for all students is, I don't want to get into any particular cases, of course, but a common concern I've heard from several parents is that they feel like sometimes when there's a incident that their students want to report, that they don't always feel they have feedback or awareness as a parent of what's kind of going on or what remediation is being taken and things like that. And I'm curious, when you kind of look at the overall picture, non-discrimination and inclusivity for knowing about financial aid, for knowing about different programs, being inclusive in sports, but also when there are incidents of bullying or harassment, if there's kind of recommendations or progress to be made in making that both the reporting and reaction process as smooth as possible for families.
Are you talking about, so if a parent would, or a student would bring forth a complaint or concern, that they're not necessarily knowing the end results of that? Is that
I think the concern I've heard, to kind of generalize it, is that until a family goes through a process of dealing with a bullying or harassment incident, they don't know what the process is, and so they always feel like that they don't know what the next step is or what they need to do.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of kind of talking to their neighbors saying, hey, did this ever happen to you? Oh yeah, I have to fill out this form. Oh, when did you hear back? Oh, we never heard back. Someone never called us, or whatever it might be in their case. Not to say that always happens, but I think that for example, if there's a case where a student reports something to a teacher or principal, and how long it takes that to get back to the parents and kind of close the loop on that conversation, and find ways that make the student feel safe, in addition to whatever punishment and remediation has to happen, making sure that both the parents and the family, the parents and the student feel kind of safe in that environment. And so I think that communication, closing the loop, is something that I've heard as a gap from a few parents.
Okay. I would say what I sometimes hear from families is it's that not knowing what that end result is, and it can be very frustrating for families. But sometimes you can't give that end result to families, so it is left unopen. Like we don't talk about discipline of another student to, just like I wouldn't talk about their child's discipline to anybody else. So sometimes, and I always try to tell families that I can sympathize with that frustration because I know the end result. They don't know the end result. And sometimes that feels like nothing's happened. But there are times, I would say that we do a really good job at that investigation. I think sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it is unresolved because we don't know who it was. There are many times students will report things. We were just talking about a situation and the student can't tell us who it was. And so it's left it is left unopened and it hasn't been resolved. Because we don't know how to resolve that when we don't know who it is. But it can be very, very frustrating. And you have to look at each case individually. And I would encourage if parents, I would say, we have an online reporting tool. Kids can report via on their computer. They have talking with teachers or going down to talk to administration or school counselors to make sure that those get reported. So I would hope that parents wouldn't be discouraged because they don't have that end result, because we need to know about it. We can't address an issue if we don't know it's.
Absolutely, yeah. And I agree and sympathize with all of that, especially the legal requirements of not being able to talk about other students. That's certainly a fact. I just wonder, in the overall scope of this report, of thinking about all different ways that we make sure that the district is open to all students of all backgrounds. I think that detail is one that I've heard the most about from families. And so I'm just kind of looking at page 15 of the report saying, how can we improve this, right? So it's not so much a question as much as like, as a board, as a district, how can we improve that feedback process in a way that really is, maybe isn't completely satisfying to families and students, but at least reduces their frustration in some way and gives them a sense of belonging and comfort.
Yep.
I think to add a tack to that, that if a student has been harmed or bullied or has seen that, they're, brainstorming other ways just to make sure a student is supported beyond just what is the punishment for the other person. Because regardless if we can give that information or not, it's more important that a student who has been through that, even if they're witnessing it to someone else, is supported.
Yeah.
And so I think I would just add that to the conversation that there are other ways for that gap to be filled, I think.
Yep.
I also think it's a fantastic report, and I did read the whole thing, actually. And, it's one of those reports that raises more questions than it answers, and that's its job.
Yep.
Right? And so I guess my question would be, how will this report become part of the strategic planning process? Because it's lining up nicely, we're about a year out. There's some really good information in here, and what I like about it is when you put it in this report, you pause. Most of this stuff we've seen in different places, but here you sit down and read it and say, okay, are we doing a good job from this perspective?
Yeah.
I can read through this and just say that the variable of IEPs, right? 16% of high school kids have an IEP. 10% of kids with an IEP are doing sports or a club, right? And I go through and look at that perspective. And so I hope it gets somehow interwoven into the strategic planning process. It's a good tool, resource.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Carl. And in addition to the strategic planning process, every year we create our work plan, and a number of items that have led to improvement in this report have been recent items on our work plan. And I think when the board looks at our work plan for 24-25, keeping this report in mind is something that the administrative team, along with the board, should do.
The report will go up on our website. Hopefully by tomorrow.
There's a couple of items in here you mentioned out loud. The grievance policy might need some updates or other things that could be, language updated or practices updated. Are there other major challenges you see going forward to kind of improve non-discrimination and equal opportunity of education?
I just think it's about coming back to the conversation. It's hard in your daily job to get back into a job and then forget about some of this. It's about bringing it back to the table and saying, remember these practices that we're doing. There's a reason and purpose behind them, and that to continue to keep them, to continue to have conversations about this. I think that's a big piece of that.
Is that something that I suppose that gets incorporated into professional development?
Yeah. And then we'll talk about this when we get together with just student services teams, because they are a big piece of this.
But I do think we can be proud of the lens that we look at things through. I know the board does. I know as a leadership team, we do as well. So when we're looking at things, whether we're talking about, class size policies or academic or extracurricular opportunities, our fee structures, our district calendar, I mean, think of all the different things that we discuss. If you think back to those conversations, almost all of them have had perspective from lens of equal opportunity and non-discrimination. So from that standpoint, like Tony said, I think we have a lot to be proud of. I think we have a lot of good work that's been done. I think continuing on that path is something that we obviously all want to do.
Thank you so much for all the work that went into this report, and I'm glad that DPI gave you all that extra time. It was well deserved. And thank you for being here tonight to talk about it. I guess I should have asked, but there are no further comments on that. We'll move on to recommendations for policy 343.1 on class sizes.
Okay, so we didn't necessarily list this as a first reading because I think we're going to want to have more discussion about the direction the board wants to go on this. We did take a look at this policy at the last meeting, and we brought this forward with the idea, knowing that our staffing plan and all of our planning for next year is really ramping up. And we also know that in some of our elementary sections especially, but not just elementary, middle school and high school, difficult decisions are going to need to be made in terms of sectioning and staffing. So when we talked last time, we looked at our current policy and we discussed the idea of making sure that that policy aligns well with practice. And that is a concern of mine because our current policy really states that we're not adding additional sections until we get over 30 kids in a class. And when we look at, some of the lower levels, especially, that's a concern. In doing the research, and Brian did a great job with the research, and I hope you had a chance to look at as much of that as you had time for, there really isn't a real direct correlation between class size and student achievement unless you're talking large-scale differences of class size, double-digit kids, for instance. And we also know, though, that when we talk about teacher retention and teacher burnout and having relationships with kids, we do know that class size has an impact there as well. So in Tony's research of other districts, it was interesting to us that most other districts have gone away from setting guidelines based on numbers. Their policies are more really a philosophical statement about trying to work within the means of the school district, and that the district believes in having class sizes that are as small as possible within the means that we have, and also based on different curricular areas, the needs of the students and such. So I guess that's what we have for you tonight to look at and discuss, and depending on how the discussion goes, we will then bring a first reading of a new policy for you for our next board meeting. But we thought it was important to have this discussion ahead of that actual policy recommendation. So thoughts?
My quick thought was, having outlined numbers that were not requirements, they were guidelines, then they're not a requirement in the first place. So, that means you've always had the flexibility as a leadership team to set class size wherever you need it, even though that there was a guideline. I generally support the new text about the purpose and the thought process going into setting class sizes. I do wonder, one of the sentences removed in the draft, if during registration process, class size exceeds size targets, the following considerations should be utilized for making recommendation to, essentially building principal will make a recommendation. And that first sentence basically just says up at the top, class size will be determined by the administrator. So I almost wonder if we can't reword that such that each year recommendations for class size are made by principals to the administrator for approval or something like that, and that you would then expect each principal to have rationale for whatever it is size they're picking. And is that right? Like, tell me the why. If it makes sense, that's what should happen. because the way it's worded, the old one put more on the principals, it looks like. I'm not sure that's what the intention is in the language here, but the principals aren't evident really in the top portion right now.
Sure. You know, the second paragraph talks about administrative staff, but you're right, it doesn't specifically call out principals. But yeah, we could certainly add something in about that, if this is the direction the board wants to go.
I'm a bit concerned with the just wholesale deleting of guideline numbers. Because once the statement's purely philosophical, there's no way to kind of tether discussions, right? So suppose you want to have a philosophical discussion about should we have 2 sections or 3 sections of 4th grade at some school. Well, it's to look at guideline numbers based on historical practices and to look at maybe, recent years of enrollments. That's something I feel like I can focus on and think about the trade-offs of, versus kind of a philosophical statement and a single recommendation seems very hard to actually discuss when you talk about like the staffing plans and things like that. So I'm a little concerned that the purely philosophical approach is too vague to actually ground discussions, especially as the people on the board looking at staffing plans will, essentially always be non-experts, and so need a little bit more guidance in that sense. I'm also a little concerned that the discussion, part of this discussion, not all of it, but part of this discussion came out of discussions with staff and teachers about if some classes had grown to a point they were very hard to keep keep stress levels low enough that the teacher was comfortable with how things were going. And I think that if part of the goal is to allay the fears of teachers who are worried about kind of burnout, that going from having fixed numbers to not having them will probably amplify those fears instead of diminish them. So I'm a little worried about that. Just as I don't think that's the direction that's intended to go necessarily if it can be avoided, but it does maybe give that impression. So I'm not sure where that goes.
I think that's a reasonable point, and from an administrative standpoint, it is actually easier for us to have numbers. It actually takes some of like Carl said, they're guidelines, so I know you're expecting us to come back with the best staffing plan based on the resources we have available. I know that, but when there are numbers, it makes it easier as long as the board is ready to stand up for those numbers.
And to that point, and I agree with what Dave said, right now we have a staff that I feel very comfortable with, and the administration, and I think this philosophical statement would probably be just fine with our present condition. But what if those conditions change and the administration says that numbers aren't a concern, so to have a policy for the future.
We must both be teachers. Because that's my first thought is that, ideally, this would work, but in my mind, I can't help but think it also opens it up both ways, that like it could be used in a reasonable way, and also it's always going to be like cheaper to have more kids in one room than like whatever. So like that would be a little difficult. It's also really easy. It's easier to kind of be removed from the impact of that here rather than like being in the classroom. So I'm very freaked out at the thought of like hacking out all the numbers visually.
I prefer to have the numbers. Maybe we look at other districts, maybe we should set the presidents instead of other districts. I don't know, maybe we should tell them they should choose. I don't know. But anyhow, I'm just wondering about that. And the reason I say that is because I taught, 4th grade for 11.5 years. And I can tell you there were some years when I had 30 plus students in my class. And if you have 1 or 2 students that require a lot of high maintenance because maybe behavior or academic issues, it can really tear you down. I mean, it's like, do I really want to get them to go to work today kind of thing. And I don't like, you know, I want to stand up for the teachers that they have a chance to, you know, say, hey, this is not working for me, and be able to be heard and have some kind of thing. The other thought on that, just like too, is dollars, you know. Obviously, if we're going to add another section or a paraeducator, that's another more dollars that we may not have. So we have to be cognizant of that, so. Yeah. But I'd rather look at the numbers.
I have a question. I'm sorry if you answered it already. I know you mentioned that this policy change came up, or like reviewing it because of potential discussion in the future, I think is what you said, maybe something like that. Is there something specific from the changes that like really, sorry, it's been a long day, that you really do want to stick with, that you really like better than the old one? Because I feel like right now with them uncharacteristically changes that. I want the old thing.
No, not necessarily. I was fine with the old one. My biggest concern with the current policy, the old one, is that I want to make sure that we, as an administrative team, are doing what the board directs us to do through policy. And again, to Carl's point, these are guidelines, but I also know that we had a couple sections this year, and people might not realize this, but we have made cuts year after year when we're able to make cuts. So we run an efficient organization here. And we do have a couple sections this year where I know that people would have preferred to have an extra section because it would have dropped their class sizes down. And looking across the board, I know there's other areas where we could reduce sections if we felt it was needed. We haven't done that for a number of reasons. Staff retention, student challenges, trying to provide the best educational experience with great relationships for our kids. But then I get concerned in looking at some of our classroom sectioning. If you look at those numbers and you look at this policy, is what we've done aligned with what this policy suggests? And I know you can look at this on the low end or the high end, but I know right now that we could combine some sections and stay under 30 kids.
And just for, sorry, for clarity, combining sections and staying under 30, are you talking like across grade level? Or like at the high school with like different classes?
I would say the easiest example to understand would be at our elementary schools. We have some grade levels in some of our buildings where we have chosen to have 3 sections or 4 sections when we could have reduced it to 2 or 3 and kept it under 30 kids. But then you're talking probably, 28, 29 kindergartners running around the classroom. I know that, I don't think that's the intention.
I get the picture.
I don't think that's the intention of this policy, especially when you look at, those classes can go as low as 15. But I also understand that that is an area where someone could be very critical of the district of overstaffing. I definitely don't think we're overstaffed. I just want to make sure, though, that I clearly understand what the direction from the board is through the policies that we have.
So it's sort of like what Dale was saying earlier, like with our staff and admin that we have now, like you are prioritizing having those lower numbers, but it's not as clear as it could be that it's following guidelines. That's a tricky question.
No, I think that's a reasonable way to say it.
Okay.
And I have not felt pressure from the board to jack up class sizes. That's not where I'm going with this. But at the same time, especially now with the referendum failing, we're meeting as an administrative team tomorrow to start developing a list of reductions. Certainly class size, combining sections, it's more expensive to have more sections. There's no doubt about it. So I think the board needs to really think about what kind of direction you want to give us. And we're not going to just make decisions without bringing them to the board, but we also want to bring decisions to or recommendations to the board that align with what the board philosophy is.
So I'm looking at the spreadsheet that was on the last meeting when we had kind of a breakdown of all different classes. And it's interesting how, even in similar grade levels, some classes are, pushing that 30 number or at least mid-20s, and some of them are much lower. And I wonder, some of that is sort of random, say between schools, and just where people happen to live. And some of that is, choices about in which grade levels and which buildings, maybe, there needs to be additional support or maybe, 3 sections instead of 2 is beneficial for particular reasons that the principals have and teachers have in mind. So I guess I totally understand that desire for the flexibility. I think that absolutely makes sense. And I wonder if there's a way to prioritize 2 things simultaneously, which is having the numbers maybe be a little more consistent, even if they're not tightly bound to 25 or 30 or whatever, but looking at can we make the numbers not so such a large numbers, and in doing so maybe consolidate some classes, but not in a way that's only in this row or this row, but across the entire district.
If we close enrollment on September 1st and don't let anybody leave, we can do it perfectly. The problem is that, as we are getting ready for our staffing and trying to anticipate how many students will be in a building, we have to gamble a little bit, and we have to try to guess how many students are going to come into certain sections in certain buildings in certain areas. For instance, I would anticipate that we would have more students add at Oaklawn Elementary School next year than leave, especially with the new housing development. So when we look at sectioning for Oaklawn Elementary next year, we're going to definitely consider that. We also consider the demographics of our different schools and the populations of our students that are being served by those schools. So we can try to consider that when we think about how many students are in sections. We also think about special needs. I mean, there's so many things that go into these decisions, and that's why having the numbers is also tricky. I think these are all very valid points, and maybe it's something where if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I have a clear understanding, though, that when we bring you our staffing plan, that we have an understanding that these are guidelines, and that we're going to do the best we can to provide you with a recommendation based on those guidelines, but also based on what we think the needs of our schools are.
In particular, thinking about those needs, I think this was referenced fairly directly, right? Like if there's a grade level where there's a lot of English language learners, or more than maybe an average number of IEPs, there will necessarily be more demands on the teacher, more staffing concerns. And so maybe that's a situation you're thinking of where, keeping classes size a little bit smaller would be very beneficial to the operation of the entire building and wing of the building in that case. And so it's pressures like that which are hard to kind of put into policy in a literal way, but are always in the principal's mind about how they want their building to operate. So is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess that is one of the appealing things about the option that Tony found, is that it provides a little more flexibility in my mind without trying to hit certain numbers that may or may not be applicable at all to certain situations. But it all just depends on how the board reacts, I guess. And as long as we have a clear understanding, it doesn't really matter to me. But setting for the future, it could be different.
Well, like Jay's point, it would be nice if we could balance class sizes so that every 4th grade in the whole thing, you have 25 students, period. But you can't do that because you've got 2 outlying schools that only have 1 section. And sometimes those sections are very small, 10, 11, 13, 14, 16 kids. And then you have in-town schools that are much more. And so it's really hard to determine that. And then when we were talking earlier about class sizes, what if we have to close a school because we don't have funds to keep it open, then what are we going to do with those kids? Bus them, and then, there's all those kinds of things we have to think about.
I would go, so this is discussion, so my very first comment that I'm okay with the concept doesn't mean that we should get rid of the numbers. This is dialogue. And so I do feel somewhat like if it ain't broke, don't fix it to some extent. Or maybe there's a way to meld those together. If people feel there needs to be a guideline though, again, guideline is not something that you're gonna come back and say, Joe, you wrote policy. It's a guideline, it's not shall and must. The other thing to think about is the why of it all, right? Why is there numbers there? Where do the numbers come from? We had a good amount of literature shared with us. I am sure there's other literature, because one person trying to get ready for one meeting can't find everything out there. But it sounded like there was more correlation between staff satisfaction and career happiness to teaching ratios than there was a clear difference between 18 and 20 kids for learning outcomes. So the other thing I'll throw out there is about 24 states do have minimum class ratios. My guess, I'm not an expert, is that those were negotiated through the political process. They were not based on necessarily the best literature and outcomes. Otherwise, we'd be looking at the same thing, making exactly that decision. It would be a no-brainer. So, you know, if this is first reading, probably 3 of us may not even be on any future vote for this policy. But I think it's just important to not put in place rules that are so strict that you can't adapt to whatever's going to come next with funding and with staffing and with enrollment. And if you go away from hard numbers, then it shifts from a policy to more of a performance thing. Are you happy with your administration's decisions? And you would go about that discussion in a different way than, well, you wrote policy. Either way, you're all doing the best thing for the students.
I will say that the numbers are guidelines, but our teachers pay attention to them. And we will, I mean, we will have teachers, you know, have someone move in and then, you know, right away it's to their building principal, well, the guidelines say this, so, you know, what extra support is there or whatever it might be. So if there are numbers included in it, you know, yes, they may be guidelines, but some people are going to interpret them as strict guidelines.
I think there might be a way to combine them and keep sort of the philosophical sense, but things like reasonable levels might mean something different to every person sitting here and might mean something very different this year than they do in 2025 and 2026. And so I would like to see some sort of window with numbers because I think that keeps the creep from happening in either direction. But I do think some of this philosophical language is important because it clarifies the why and sort of makes it obvious that this is why this window is here and why we might have to discuss extending it or, you know, looking at additional support even in a smaller classroom.
So,
I was just gonna say, that was kind of my thought was if we are, I'm mostly fine with the way the policy is, but if we were to change it, I do like the idea of sort of combining mostly paragraph 3, maybe paragraph 2, with what is kind of in there. And I like how you phrase that, explaining the why. I think it makes it a little clearer that it is a guideline, because honestly, as a teacher, I think I also did sort of read it as, there's over 30 kids, where's my help? Like, so I think explaining it as a guideline, using the red text that's newer would be helpful.
I agree. I like what Amber said. I think a combination of that which you put together, along with some guidelines. You know, I think that the report, you know, that you referred to, Carl, a little bit. I thought it omitted some important things, and I think that the reason that we should have some flexibility and get some structure is because I think we should give a lot of power to our special services people, our principals, and our staff, and let them, you know, they're at the cutting edge, let them use the guidelines to the best of the students' advantage.
You know, if the evidence is strong that class size has an effect on teacher satisfaction, we may want to add a couple of words in here in addition to the student's educational experience, quality instruction, appropriate learning environment, individual student needs, and teacher wellness, or pick whatever phrase you want to use that acknowledges that it's a real thing. The evidence Brian pulled, it was at least equal, if not more than outcomes.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you'd like us to blend it a little bit. And bring back a recommendation for your first review next meeting for potential approval at the meeting following that. Great, thank you.
That's what I think. Tony, I do have one kind of thing that wasn't in the report, and you can tell me maybe why it wasn't. And that would be the special needs teachers and their class loads.
So I would say they don't have a class load, they have a, why we call it a caseload.
Caseloads, right, that's what I mean.
When we're talking about class size, we're talking about your general ed teacher's class size. And all special ed students are regular ed students first. And so they are all assigned to a regular ed teacher. So they're part of this class size. And our special ed students may leave their classroom to go to a special ed room, but it's not, all kids spend a portion of their day in their regular ed education class. So when we're talking about class sizes, that's kind of what we're talking. Kids may come out in groups of 3, 5, 7 to receive services. Could be math, could be reading, could be social skills. But it's not, I wouldn't necessarily consider that as far as class sizes when we're talking about like a kindergarten class size. Because those special ed students are in that kindergarten class, you would count them in the special ed teacher's class. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
Okay. And then
I'm talking more, not about class sizes as much as caseloads.
Caseload, okay. So we do have caseload, and I'm trying to think of what board policy it's regular, probably open enrollment is listed. So I do caseload factoring, so all special ed kids are assigned a case manager. Just like all kids, based on their needs, I don't count kids as like 1, 2, 3, 4. I count kids based on their, special ed kids based on their needs. So it's based on their grade level, it's based on their disability, and it's based on the services that they're needed. And so I give kids a caseload factory number. Now that could be 1.75, it could be 2, it could be 3. And so I calculate those. I do that probably multiple times a year. I take teachers' caseloads and I calculate them and try to get them in a range. This is an old model from DPI, very old, but it's the best thing we have so far. There has been continued talk about revising it, but it has not been done yet. I try to get them to be about a 26. A teacher's caseload factory, you try to hit that 26 point. Sometimes it goes over, and then that's when additional maybe paraeducator support would come in. So you take that into consideration too. When caseloads get significantly higher, that's when I come back here to say, oh, we need another teacher, which I've done before, because those caseload factory numbers are just increasing, that adding additional maybe paraeducator staff isn't going to be an assistant. You actually need another teacher to take kind of that load off. But students aren't necessarily counted as a 1, 2, 3. You take all of their needs into consideration and you give them a caseload factory number.
Oh, that's good, thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to say that caseload factoring too is what makes us decide whether we can open enroll anybody from outside the district into a special ed classroom.
Yes, yep,
I need to write that as well. We
Yep.
found out earlier that we have no room
Yep.
unless they move to the district.
Yep.
So, and then we have to serve them.
Yep.
But what I really wanted to say was that I don't want you to think that, we're totally against this, or, because I know you put some work into it. But I think it's been a good discussion, and I just wanted you to let you know that I'm thankful that you took your time to take a look at it.
I'm happy because this is about how we anticipated this would go.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes me feel good that we're working together well, and that's good.
Are you saying the board is predictable?
I think we're working well together.
If there's no more discussion on policy 343.1, we can move on to a review of our CISA 10 shared service contracts for 2024-25.
And Rachel, if it's okay with you, I'll kind of speak to both of these items together. For anybody who doesn't know, there are different CISA regions across the state, and the CISAs offer school services. Now, Menomonie doesn't typically purchase as many services as a lot of small schools. For instance, the smallest school I was ever at was in Cassville, where we had less than 300 kids. And I'd have the administration meeting by looking in the mirror as the K-12 principal and the superintendent. But we then contracted with CISA for curriculum leadership, special education director, technology, etc. We have a great team here. Because we're large enough, we don't have to contract out for as many services. So you'll see in both CISA 10 and CISA 11 that we don't purchase many services. Now, CISA 10 excels in some areas that CISA 11 does not necessarily offer. So that's why CISA 10 is on here. They're out of Chippewa Falls. We're in the geographic region for CISA 11 out of Turtle Lake. So the district directors who utilize these services have reviewed the contracts, and I believe it's the same recommendation that we've had really for a number of years for some services from CISA 10, some from CISA 11. That's what's going to be recommended for the board to approve at the next meeting. But in terms of the specific services, we could take any questions, and I know the directors can answer them. Anybody?
This is pretty standard.
Very, very standard.
Yeah.
All right, looks like we have no questions on these contracts. And so we can skip right to extracurricular staff contract requests.
So this is an informational item that comes before the board monthly. You can see there is a list of extra and co-curricular staff contracts. Unless there's any questions, it's for your information only.
Any questions about the extra and co-curricular contracts?
Are those CE instructors, is that something community-based?
Yes, community ed instructor, lifeguard certification. The other ones are aquatics, yoga, and aqua size. Yeah, a lot of activities in the pool, you're correct, Carl.
On some of the coaches that, I guess, I realize I never asked this question before, on some of the coaches where their season lasts more than, the current period of this report, is that, they only appear here once when that contract is initialized, or is it, is the amount the sum of several reports?
This is when this is reported after they are hired, and in some cases, coaches are hired mid-season. The other piece to it is that there's a certain number of points allocated to each activity, and sometimes the head coaches, they'll work with their staff and then to kind of divvy up the points as they go, depending on how it works out with the staff.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sam, anything to add? Okay.
All right, if there's no other questions regarding that, we have items related to our next board meeting. Spring break is coming up, March 11th through 15th, so our next regular school board meeting will be March 18th. We have only one meeting in March, no school on March 29th, and we'll have a spring school board election April 2nd. And then the joint PAC CISA board meeting is April 4th in Turtle Lake, and I believe the deadline for telling Jenny you wanted to register for that has passed, so hopefully everyone wants to ready up.
We could still get people in if anybody's super interested. Just get a hold of Jenny tomorrow, please.
And then we'll have a regular school board meeting April 8th. If there's no questions on that, I'd like to suggest we take a 5-minute recess before we move into closed session.